Hi there, I'm Diane Callahan, developmental editor and YouTuber quotidian writer. I'm here with Erin Spencer, who is the founder and executive producer of One Night Stand Studios, a full-service audiobook and voice arts creative studio for independent authors. She's also an award-winning narrator of over 350 titles and author of the novel The Yes Factor. So we've had the pleasure of working with Erin, Jordan Riley Swan, and Hira Bowen, and all of us. We've had 3 of our books adapted into audiobooks. The Heart Spitting is narrated by Exie Sands. Wish Hunter is read by Lisa Flanagan. And then Limelight Larceny has an amazing full cast audiobook production with 12 narrators, including Erin herself. So I thought it would be just great to have Erin on our channel here and to ask her a few questions about audiobooks. Personally, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, so I'm really excited to learn more about your profession and everything. So I'd love to hear more just about your background and what got you into audiobook narration.
Sure. I live in Los Angeles and I moved to LA as an actor. And at some point after I'd been here for a while, a friend of mine that I'd gone to high school with had broken out into audiobooks and really, like, it was a big deal. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. I've always liked to read. I hadn't really even considered audiobooks as something to investigate. So with her success, I just got into a workshop and made a demo and, started basically. It took about a year to really on ramp into it. But yeah, that just, it started, and it was one of those things. I think it was just the right fit for me, because it took off. And I have a pseudonym as well that does romance, and that ended up being like a whole other version of audiobooks that took on a life of its own. Sometimes you just walk down a path and it keeps going for you, right? I didn't hit any dead ends yet.
Wow. And so you've also narrated for like a lot of traditional publishing companies as well, right? Like, so how did you get into that? They just noticed your work and they decided to hire you, or?
No, I emailed my first big publisher to work with was Penguin Random House. They have studios here in LA. I emailed them once a month for about a year, and just sort of like, hey, here's what I'm doing, even if it was like I have 2 books, on Audible. And I just sort of kind of just stayed and checked in with them. And the audiobook world is super small and very friendly. Like, people don't slam doors in your face. They may say like, I don't have anything for you right now, but thank you. Like, no one just ignores you, really. So it's reassuring, especially coming from on-camera acting where people just don't respond, right? Like, it's you go to an audition and you leave and you either get it or you never hear from them again, or about that project. So, it was very just welcoming and warm in that way. So I thought, well, I'll keep emailing. And I did. And I got an audition and I got my first book at Penguin Random House. And then that led to other books. And I worked for Scholastic, HarperCollins. I've done a lot of young adult audiobooks. That's sort of mostly what I do, or new adult as well. And eventually, I started working for Penguin Random House as a freelance director. So also because I had a home studio, so I knew how to use the software. I knew how to use all the equipment. And I was an actor, so I understood actors. So it was just sort of a natural progression for me to work with actors, from celebrities to people that were brand new on their very first audiobook.
Wow.
And then I started producing, and I've produced, huge audio dramas with over 40 cast members, and to just, a one narrator story. So opening One Night Stand Studios seemed like the progression of things for me, just because I'd done so many things within the audiobook world.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, it shows that the persistence really paid off and then everything sort of compounded on itself. So you could get
Yeah,
up to that point. So what does
right.
a typical workday look like for you then?
I generally come in my office. I have 2.5-year-old twins, so I have to get their day started. And then once they're sorted, I come in my office. I usually answer emails for a couple of hours. We have a lot of projects going all the time. We work with a lot of indie authors, romance, and other genres. I mean, like, we did The Witch Hunter, which was so much fun. It was so well written. Um, and yeah, so emails for a couple of hours. I try and go in my studio every day. I don't book myself as much as I used to as a narrator because I'm running the company and it's just busy. But I do have people that work for me and keep keep the ball rolling. Yeah, so that's it. And then I try and exercise and, eat lunch
Yeah,
and
do other things. Yeah,
do other things
for
besides
beyond that.
be on my
Yeah.
computer.
So when you were a narrator, how many hours did you usually spend in front of a mic, like every day?
I try and do 2 hours a day. That's what I'm comfortable with. In fact, I really like 90 minutes a day. I don't know, that extra 30 minutes sometimes just can be hard, but I can push up to 3 hours a day. And I'm pretty fast. I've been doing this a long enough time. And my setup, I'm looking over there because my studio is literally right there. Um, I don't, I don't make a ton of mistakes. So I'm able to accomplish a lot in 2 hours, maybe, 90 minutes of audio in 2 hours. But the key to that is turning off your phone, turning off your email notifications, making sure, your air conditioner's on so you don't get too hot, like just being comfortable and not distracted. That's really the key because I used to check my email at the end of every chapter.
Uh,
Terrible, right? And especially when they're short chapters and it was like 5 minutes, then I'm checking my email again. So I turn everything off, get that work done because, audiobook narration is not a job that you can multitask with. It's extremely focused. You have to just be in the story. You have to be connected to the characters. And if you're not, it's not going to be good. So really eliminating distractions is key.
yeah, so that's like part of the reason that it takes like the several weeks, like 4 to 6 weeks for the average length of audiobook because you're recording in those chunks. But it sounds like you tend to do you just do like single runs or do you like have to redo lines or like what's the process?
Yeah, if I make a mistake, like there's something we do, it's called punch and roll. So you kind of go back to the beginning of, you know, where you made that mistake and you punch in and you re-record the new. So it's sort of like editing as you go, but of course everything has an editor. Just like authors, right? Like you wouldn't just write a book and be like, oh, I was an English major, I'm pretty sure it's good. You always get an editor, right? So the same thing with audiobooks, like, oh, I feel like I made no mistakes, and of course you make 50 mistakes or whatever it is. So it goes to editing, it goes to QC, it has a mastering that needs to be done. So the narration is just one aspect of it. There's a whole other process in the post-production side, and that is very important. And I think people don't know about how important post-production is, just like how important an editor is for a writer. Um, it can make or break a book, post-production. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
So
it
that's
is, yeah, it's a very time intensive project. So like how many hours do you think go into like a 10-hour book?
that's a good question. I'd say 30 to 40.
Yeah, because that's what I find really interesting about the narration side. Like for my YouTube channel, my other one, like I do voiceover narration. And so, even to do like record a 10-minute video takes me hours. So just because I tend to redo lines a lot. But
Yeah.
yeah, because that is the tough part, I think, of creating anything is that the time it takes somebody to consume it is just a fraction of what it takes to make it. But
Exactly. And I always tell people, I mentor narrators and I coach as well. And I always say, if you spend too much time second guessing your choices, this is going to take forever. And, if it takes 40 hours to record a 10-hour audiobook, you're still only getting paid for a 10-hour audiobook. So you have to trust your talents and your instincts and your preparation and do it and read the book, get it out. Don't worry, you can do it again, but do you need to do it again? Keep moving forward. It's a marathon, right?
mhm.
So yeah, I think especially with newer narrators, they tend to second guess. I think the more experienced narrators, they just trust their prep, trust their talents, and read.
Wow. And do they typically read the book in advance before they do the whole narration? Like, do they read the whole book through and then they do the narration?
Yeah, I would say most of the time. Um, just because, this is like a common adage, but it's like, oh, I didn't prep this one time. And then on page 345, it says she has a deep Southern drawl. And you're like, oh my God, I just did it, General American, and you're just screwed. So, I mean, prepping is key, looking up words. There's a lot of research that goes into it. I feel like audiobook narrators are extremely interesting people and very smart people. I mean, they're reading all kinds of stuff that they wouldn't necessarily read for pleasure. All different genres, we're getting stuff from all over the place. So that's pretty cool. Um, but yeah, the prep is important. I think if you're doing a series and you're in the series and you know that world and you know the characters, the prep isn't as labor intensive. It can be more of a skim, or when I produce, I ask the author a lot of questions. Sometimes I do Zooms with authors. I love doing Zooms with authors. Authors are like my favorite people, and that's why I love my job. I love authors. And I do Zooms with authors all the time, every week. And a lot of it is just like, I want to know more about your characters. And I ask a lot of questions and how do they sound? And da 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 da. And I actually pass a lot of those notes on to narrators to inform them of the characters. So yeah, sometimes the prep doesn't have to be so,
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it doesn't need to
involved.
be so exhaustive because I sent for Wish Hunter, I sent like a list of like, okay, here's the characters' backgrounds. Like, okay, we have like a Polish grandmother, so she's got an accent, and then it's set in Savannah, Georgia. So I had to be like, okay, who has a Southern accent? And we decided for Nadia, the main character, that she doesn't really have a Southern accent because I know that that can be a little grating for some people to hear that for the whole course of an audiobook.
Yeah.
Um,
And Wish Hunter, because I read it, right, for pleasure. I would have to say I only read like 3 books a year for pleasure. I mean, even though I worked on the book, I read it for pleasure. Like I read it in bed at night. Um, that wasn't an easy book to narrate. There was a lot of Polish words. There was a lot of research for the narrator, actually. And yeah, I was reading it going, okay, this was like it was very well researched.
Yeah, and we really tried to match up all the the factual details and to make sure that the language was right. And that's actually part of the reason I chose Lisa Flanagan as a narrator, is because when we had a few different narrators do the test, for our audience to know. And so, but the reason I chose Lisa was because there had been some Spanish in the scene I'd sent her, and like she pronounced it, and I was like, oh, she's gonna know how to like tackle other languages. If there's other, like foreign words in there, she's really gonna try to learn how to pronounce it. And I was like, okay, that's very valuable to have that, with all these different characters from different backgrounds. So
Yeah.
that is kind of an underrated part of audiobook narration. That's like, like if you have some fluency in another language or something like that. Like I listened to the audiobook recently of Giovanni's Room, which has some French in it. And so some of the reviews were like, this narrator doesn't know how to speak French. And I was like, well, I can't tell because I don't speak French. But I was like, that must be challenging as an audiobook narrator. Like okay, well, there's like a Southern character and there's like a French character, and you have all these different types, and you have to master every single type of dialect or accent.
Well, you don't. Um, Surprisingly, and I hate to say this, but audiences, listeners will easily invest in a story if the story is good, right? It has to come from the writer, but if the narrator is a good storyteller, and they're very forgiving most of the time. If the storytelling is really solid and you give it a hint of something, for instance, I did this book, I can't remember what it was called. It was set in Boston, which I think everybody knows. Everyone makes fun of actors that try and do a Boston accent, right? It's just like they get grilled. I'm like, oh, great. Okay, this Boston accent, it's set in Boston, and there's a female cop who is just like that Boston cop. I can't really do a Boston accent. I listened to a couple of YouTube videos. I tried it on. I did my best. It probably sounded like Long Island or something. I don't know what it was. People loved it. I got like really great reviews and people were calling out this character. And I'm thinking,
Wow.
what are they talking about? My accent's not good. My husband's from Boston. He goes, do your Boston accent for me. And I was like, okay. And he goes, God, that's terrible. But I gave it just enough, right? I just led people, I gave them a taste and I let their imaginations fill in the blanks with the accents. And I think if the storytelling is really solid and committed, the listeners are forgiving most of the time.
Yeah, I love that. And it's also really interesting to me that sometimes readers they're very opposed to certain books because of the narrators. Like I sometimes play audiobook clips on my channel, but regardless of copyright, don't come flag me, YouTube. But it's interesting that some people are like, oh, I love this narrator, or like, oh, I hate this narrator. Like people have very strong opinions about what voice they like to hear on narration. And sometimes, it's very personal taste. It's nothing personal where, I'm sure you've gotten comments where somebody's like, I don't like this narrator, or like, I love this narrator. But then both of those things can be true at the same time, because people just like you have different preferences for food and flavors. It's the same with voices.
Yes, it is. But it is interesting how, especially in romance, well, and other genres too, but just speaking on romance, like there are celebrity narrators, especially with the male narrators. I mean, there's a comment that I see all the time. It's like, he could read the phone book and I would buy it. These narrators, these guys just can't do wrong. Like they cannot do wrong. But yeah, I mean, sometimes there's been a very few times where I've delivered an audiobook to an author and they didn't love their choice. Like, the author ultimately decides and they didn't love their choice. And sometimes we have to recast and sometimes we don't. And, I think it is, like you said, it is sort of flavors. It's just, yeah, I know. Some audiobook narrators that are not good, they don't have an audiobook career.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I actually since I do voiceover for my channel, I get asked to do audiobooks a lot. And I'm like, I do not have, the technical experience for that. And you discount the fact that you also have to read dialogue, which to me is like the hardest part to read. Like I can read description all day because I can have a very neutral voice with it. But then I think that's another very challenging part of narrating audiobooks is you got to differentiate the characters with the dialogue. And so how do you? Yeah, go ahead.
You have to be an actor.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's like the number one thing. So I teach audiobook classes. I'll be in Atlanta actually next month at the Atlanta Voiceover Studio. I'm doing a 2-day workshop there. I usually go there once a year. But something I hear a lot is I read books to my kids at night and I do all these voices and my kids think they're great. And I thought I should be in audiobooks. I have heard that so many times and I'm always like, uh-oh, let's see what we got. Sometimes they end up being good, but ultimately you have to be an actor. And I feel like people that aren't actors, they're more comfortable with nonfiction
Mhm.
because then they don't have to they don't have to do accents. They don't have to act. Like, you still have nonfiction has its own challenges. You have to be a great storyteller. You have to be super engaging to
Mhm.
read nonfiction. But the dialogue of fiction is scary for some people that aren't actors.
And especially when it comes to doing the opposite gender, like, or, a particular type of character. Like, if I had to read some gruff character, as like a woman, it's this female character, like this, like a hardened cop, like I don't think I could really pull that off without it sounding ridiculous. Because, there's many times I've listened to an audiobook where, a male narrator is reading a woman and then he makes it that the high pitched, raspy voice of like every woman. And you're like, why did you do this?
Right.
But I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of amazing male narrators out there, but I do find it funny like that.
Mhm.
That is like a challenge of audiobook narration, is having all those, so many different types of characters. But so what are, like, how do you approach it for like differentiating characters when you're acting?
Um, you know, I worked on this audiobook years ago. Gosh, I can't think of what it was called, but it was for Penguin Random House. It was set in a high school. It was set in a high school class with 25 kids that are all from the same town, the same age. And you're just like, what am I going to do with this? And that's just too many. This is too many. Otherwise, you can't do something with everybody, is my point. Like, you kind of pick the main people and do something with them. And that's really based on their personalities. That's how I decide how I'm going to voice a character. And that's where prep comes in. What is their personality? What is revealed about them in the book? And sometimes the author is very clear about actually their voice and how they sound. She has a shy, whispery voice that you can barely hear, and you're like, okay, well, that's easy. That informed that character. And sometimes it's not that clear, and you have to just decide based on his personality what kind of voice he has. Um, I get a little. I try and avoid cliches, although sometimes they work. Like kind of the dumb jock, football player guy who's just like, I don't know, what are you talking about? Or like the skater guy or the cheerleader and like super bubbly. Sometimes it doesn't work, and again, that's where prep comes into play. If she's the cheerleader, but she's the one that's also smoking behind the school, and she's doing people are more multi-layered than cliches,
Mhm.
especially the main characters, right? So the author is writing and informing us what the layers are, and then we decide on the voices. Sometimes little sub characters are easy. It's like the guy that, in the deli, he only has a couple of lines. You could do something kind of crazy with him if you wanted to, right? He only has a couple of lines. It's not going to throw people off to hear you do an accent if it calls for it. I mean, if a writer does not indicate that there's an accent, I generally don't do an accent. Just, we're not doing like an accent showcase. But I feel like it's really the characters' personalities that inform the actors' choices. And yeah, that's it. And sometimes cliches are appropriate. Like, sometimes she is just the bubbly cheerleader.
Yeah, that makes a
Right.
lot of sense. And yeah, because it really is, it really is acting, like you said. And I also find it interesting how narrators manage to adapt things that are kind of difficult to do from text to audio. Like, even with the hard spitting, like XC Sands like learned the auction call chant to do that in the book. And it's like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Like, that's the struggle to do that, because you can easily write it out, but then to think of somebody having to say it, I'm like, ah. And there's stuff like that with other books too that are very visual or have like weird text components, and it's like, well, how do you even put that into audio? So
Yes, that is where having an experienced producer audiobook producer is key, especially if a book is different in that way, which is happening more and more. People have asked me, like, how has audiobooks changed? And I'm like, well, audiobooks have changed because writers are writing differently. Writers are like breaking the rules. So, the formatting on the page can be different, or they're writing it like a screenplay here, and there's letters, and there's a text conversation, and there's, all kinds of crazy books. Actually, one of the craziest things I've ever done, this series, the Illuminae series by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done.
I had no idea you worked on that. Like, I
Yeah.
was just reading about that book the other day, because isn't it like a multicast kind of thing?
Yeah. I directed and co-produced for Penguin Random House the whole series. As the director, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Like months of prep. I can't even describe to you what Amy and Jay did. And when they wrote that book, like, you look at it visually, it's amazing, but like, we made it a movie for your ears. It required a lot of creativity, a lot of talent by the narrators. I mean, massive multicast. It's pretty incredible. So
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
there's
wow.
3 in the series. This is the 3. Illuminae is the first one. Gemina is the second one. Oh, which I got them to sign. And Obsidio was the final book. And there's also Memento, which we did, I think, this year. That was a little novella. But like, if you
Wow.
want an extreme audiobook, unlike any audiobook you've ever heard, this is the series.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds amazing. Because I was looking at more like full cast productions and things just to see what else was out there. Because yeah, Limelight and Larceny with like 12 narrators, that's a lot to juggle too. So I mean, as the producer, you had to like sort of splice everything together and
Yes.
arrange it.
And arrange it. It gets but I did this series. So I mean, after this, like, I can do anything pretty much. Yeah, it gets tricky. It's also super tricky for post-production. It's, if an author's listening to this and like, I want to do that, warning, it's expensive. It's massively expensive, but it can be just magical. So
Yeah. So like, what else would you say for somebody who's hiring an audio narrator for the first time, like mistakes to avoid or misconceptions or anything like that?
sure. There's a few different ways that an author can get their book into audio. And I won't go into tons of details about this because it's an hour-long Zoom. We could talk about it another time on a Zoom. But you could sell your rights or let another company acquire your rights, and that's that. The cons of that the pros of that is there's no money out of your pocket. The con of that is you sort of lose control of the audiobook. Occasionally the author can have a say in casting, but not always. It's just, it's just done for you and that's it. So that can be great or bad, depending upon who you are. You can hire a production company like One Night Stand Studios to produce it for you. You have a lot more involvement, although it's not a lot of work for the author. But like I said, I do Zooms and we talk about things and I ask questions and I give casting choices and you can listen and we can do auditions, but once it starts production, the author's job is done until it's done, and then you listen to it and then you pay for it. So the con is you have to pay for it out of your pocket. But the pro is you keep a higher residual royalty amount. The other way to do it is through ACX, which is the audiocreationexchange.com. That's a platform that connects authors to narrators. Sometimes you can get your book done for free and split the royalties with the narrator producer. You can maybe pay offer them a per finished hour rate, and maybe they'll do it. The pro of that is maybe it's cheaper. The con of that is it's a little bit of a Wild West. Really established narrators are generally not on ACX.
Yeah. But you have like the up and coming talent. So sometimes you can find the balance between price and skill.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is more of like a gamble versus
It is more
like,
of a gamble. Yeah, it is more of a gamble.
And especially,
I found that,
go ahead. I'm sorry,
I found that authors, I feel like newer authors will start on ACX, but more established authors just want a production company to do it, and do it like they know it's going to be quality. There's that trust with a production company. Like, I'm going to get the best narrators we can afford. The post-production is going to be on point. This is going to be flawless. It's going to be on time. You're dealing with professionals, where ACX, it's like you're hoping for the best, and sometimes the best happens and sometimes it doesn't. So, but I think ACX is a great avenue for people, especially if they're first starting.
Yeah, because I mean, the difficulty too is that Audible has like a certain threshold for quality. So like if the audio quality isn't good enough, or there's not like long enough pauses between sentences, chapters, then they're going to reject it, because they do have like a quality threshold. So
Right.
that's, yeah.
And the author hopes that the narrator producer they're working with through ACX is aware of all of that and knows how to do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because on ACX, the narrator does everything. And not all narrators know how to, like you said, the technical element of audiobook narration, and especially in COVID, lots of the studios have closed. Like Penguin Random House is not, it's not closed permanently, but they have 10 studios that they're not using. So narrators are having to get their home studio set up, organized. And those of us that already had it, we didn't stop. It didn't slow anybody down. But for those of us, those narrators that didn't have it, that was a learning curve.
Yeah, and I mean, so it's interesting does that mean that audiobook production has slowed down due to the pandemic? Not at all. The market has boomed. This is what I'm hearing from left, right, and center. Like every author has told me that the sales are doing really well. And so what do you, go ahead.
I absolutely think that it's booming. I mean, it's been booming for 10 years. Mm-hmm. Every year it grows and grows and grows. We're not seeing a decline in audio. Audiobooks and podcasts are just like, it's going. The pandemic did not slow down audiobooks. I think it affected authors more. I've had more authors not hit their deadlines because they're homeschooling their kids, and it's such a life jarring thing. And I'm like, when are we getting that manuscript? And they're just like, I'm a month late. Okay. And we've had to do a lot of jockeying of scheduling, but that's okay. Everybody's in the same boat. We're just, rolling with it. It's all right. Everybody gets it.
Yeah, they do. And I feel like with people, having so much free time or working more at home, they can listen to audiobooks more. Although I know a lot of people would listen to it during their commutes and things like that. So maybe that's like the listenership is up because of that. But
one thing I heard, and I think this is true, because I was worried at the beginning of the pandemic that it was going to drop because people stopped commuting. And people had their kids in school, so they were like, could do other things and listen. And I thought, oh God, what's going to happen? I think it took a minute, but what I have heard from like the Audio Publishing Association, is people are spending their days on Zooms and on screens, and they don't want to be on their computer anymore. They don't want to sit in front of the TV. They've already watched every show on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. Like, there's nothing left to watch. So they're listening to audiobooks and podcasts. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
It does, because it's more passive than reading like a physical book, but then it doesn't have the screen of the ebooks. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what do you think is going to happen next for audiobooks? Like, where do you see the future of audiobooks in 10 years or so?
I think a lot of narrators are worried about AI.
Mm,
Um, I don't, I mean, I have seen that creeping in. Um, I heard some kind of AI the other day, an example, it was like a commercial or something, and you couldn't tell. It
wow.
sounded like a human. But they've said, for long format audio, it doesn't work, right? You can trick somebody in 30 seconds, but not in 8 hours of AI. I still don't think that AI is going to replace narrators. There's nothing that can replace human emotion. And I think, so I'm not too worried about AI, although some narrators are. The other thing I think is podcasts. I think audiobooks are going to, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and like how one night stand studios and things that we can produce can translate into podcasts. Uh, in not just like a chapter, a podcast, but like how can audiobooks translate into podcasts that
Mhm.
offer more than just reading a chapter, right? That's not that interesting. So
Yeah.
what can we do? Is it going to be something like, you know, an audio drama for your ears that becomes podcasts or chunks, or will it have behind the scenes type things? I don't know, but I think that's what I think. I think audiobooks and podcasts are going to start to blend and blur, and come together.
Yeah, and I've seen that a lot with podcasts, like fiction podcasts. Like there's quite a few of them. Like Welcome to Night Vale exists, but then there's also those more full production ones. I can't remember the name of it, but there's one about like a fairy tale prince. Like I think it's The Two Princes, and it's like
Mm,
an audio drama with like sound effects and everything. So it's just dialogue and sound effects. So you don't need to have like visually what's going on by the sound.
right.
Um, and I've also heard of the like with traditional books themselves, like the publisher of the Three Body Problem, which is like a sci-fi novel, that they were going to release it in chunks of chapters like per week, so it'd be limitedly available. And then but then you could listen to it for like a few months or whatever, and then it breaks it up into those chunks for free. So it is interesting to see the different ways that books are becoming available and like forms are overlapping. Like I'm sure you've heard of Sadie by Courtney Summers has like a podcast like Conceit in it. So it's like books are borrowing from podcasts and podcasts are borrowing from books. So yeah, it's really cool to see it, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the sort of future of written entertainment takes and everything like that. Like we have Kindle Vella for the serial format. We're going back in time with that, but like same with audiobook serials, and more in like, I mean, because like podcasts are kind of doing that, but I'm thinking in terms of like it's a novel, but it's the audio serial. But
Right.
I'm sure like somebody out there is already trying to pioneer that, or Audible has some kind of feature that I haven't seen yet. But
Yeah. I think people are just really exploring ways that, like you said, how those worlds can mesh. I have some ideas. I just don't have the time to do them.
yes, that makes
I'm
sense.
like, what is my time?
Yeah, so what is your dream project? Like if you do have some type of audiobook or narration project that you really wanted to do, but you haven't had the chance to do yet?
Not really. I get excited about things when they come across my desk. I mean, I worked with Jane Fonda a couple of times last year, and I was super excited to work with Jane Fonda, right? You're just like, oh, cool. I got to work with Judy Bloom yesterday.
But
Um,
didn't the book just came out? Like
there's a couple of audiobooks from her backlist that have never been made into audio. So I worked with Judy because she read some author's notes and introductions, things like that. And when I got that opportunity, I was like, generally I don't work on Wednesdays, and Judy wanted to work on Wednesday, and I'm like, I'll figure it out. I'll do it. Yes, yes. Just because like Judy Bloom books were extremely informative, important, and educational to me when I was a tween and teen. So that was really awesome. So sometimes like those celebrity opportunities are really cool. to me, and personal and meaningful. I think working on my own books, as a writer is, but again, like I don't hardly have time to do that, but that's something I still want to continue just because I enjoy that. But my favorite thing about my job is connecting with authors. Like I love doing author Zooms. I'm always trying to get authors to Zoom with me. Some are super shy and they won't do it. They're just like email only. I'm like, okay, that's fine.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But like I'm a narrator and an actor, so I like talking, obviously. And so I'm always trying to get people to Zoom with me because I love connecting with authors. I love authors. I love the whole book community. I don't know, if there's like a dream job out there. It's just, how can I make your book the best book we can make? Like I'm super invested in it. I'm invested in authors. I'm invested in narrators. I mean, because I started as a narrator, I want to like take care of narrators. I care about them. I want them to love the book. I want casting to be right. Like, oh, I know a narrator that would love this story, which is another reason why I like talking to authors, because the more I know about the book and the characters, the more I can connect a narrator to it that will love it too.
Yes,
Because I know narrators, they're my friends.
Yeah, and like all their tone of voice and like, okay, whose voice is really well suited for this story, for this narrator, like for the first person narrator in the story, and yeah, that's really amazing. So.
It's like, yeah, you want the right voice, but you also want like the right emotional connection.
Yes, for sure. And funnily enough, like I have been listening to The Friend by Sigrid Nunez, and it is narrated by Hilary Hubert, who does the main narration in Limelight Larceny. So as soon as I started listening to it, I was like, I recognize this voice. So like you said, it is a very small world, and like, yeah, everybody has their own talents in it. And it's really interesting to see how much variation there is. Yeah. And I just have one last question for you before I let you go. But I just wanted to know what an audiobook that you've really enjoyed recently is.
Well, let's see. Just the other day, I listened to Seth Rogen's Yearbook. I thought that was really funny. I was on a road trip. I actually emailed, I knew a lot of the narrators on that book. There was a ton of narrators. And I emailed them right before this call because I was like, which voice for you? There's a guy. Oh, here, he answered. He just answered 1 minute ago. Let's see what he says. Oh, okay. No, it wasn't him. Ah, shoot. There's a guy. I don't know who it was. I thought it was him, but it's not him. That plays Kanye West in Seth Rogen's book. And it was awesome. Like he was spot on. It's a big multicast. Wow. He was spot on. So that was an entertaining book. It was funny. That was enjoyable. I don't know. Like I said, I liked The Wish Hunter just to read. I enjoyed just reading that book. Have you read The Husbands yet?
I haven't. Who is that by?
I don't know. It just came out. I think it's one of the big publishers, but that was really entertaining read. See, I don't listen to audiobooks too much.
Well, see, that's like the
because irony, this is my work. This is my work, right? Like
that's true. So, like you said, you read so many books. I'm always listening to audio,
but I'm like, I don't necessarily listen to the whole book. I listen to bits and pieces of audiobooks constantly.
Yeah, so that does get like, it's you don't necessarily want to go into that. I don't know. I'm very addicted to reading, so I can't, like, even though I'm like, I edited a book all day. Now time to wind down. Let me go read a book. Like that just feels silly, but.
Oh yeah, so it's The Husbands by Chandler Baker.
Interesting. I'll have to check that out. Sounds really good. Okay, yeah, that's an awesome cover.
Yeah, it was really awesome. And talking about covers are so important.
Yeah, and you also have to get like a separate cover for the square to use for Audible, which is something also I did not think about. So like for all these books, we had to get like our cover designer to also make us the little square version to put it on Audible.
Yeah, and one thing, it's not mandatory, but it's a nice idea, and listeners actually like it, is to put your narrator on the cover.
Yes.
Read by or narrated by, so and so. sometimes it doesn't work, like just the design, it doesn't work to do that, especially if it's a big multicast, or, sometimes it's read by so-and-so and a full cast. But it's a nice idea for authors to, when they're reformatting for audio, to put the narrators on the cover.
Yeah, and it's just good to give credit where credit is due, and then also you're going to attract their fans as well, because I definitely have audiobook narrators that I'm like a huge fan of, so I'm like, I might just read this book so I can listen to them read it. Like, really, that's the thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's good advertising to have the kind of cross connections between audiences. So
I totally agree. I tell authors all the time, I'm like, narrators have a fan base, and they may not know you, but they'll know the narrator and they'll buy the book. And
Yep.
sometimes, they'll know the author, but they don't know the narrator, and they'll buy the book. So it's a cross beneficial for everybody.
Yes, definitely like symbiotic relationship going on. So for sure. But thank you so
Exactly.
much for your time and all of your insight. And yeah, we really appreciate you just putting so much work into our projects. Like I can definitely tell on like all of these audiobooks, like, it's top tier professional quality. And it's been so amazing to be able to see all the books turned into audiobooks, because I don't know, it makes them feel more real somehow. I know that's kind
Yeah.
of silly, but it does. It's like it's a
So
very different experience to hear somebody read something that you wrote or edited or anything like that, and you're like, whoa, like somebody's reading this, like now it's like super official. But
well, and I love working with Jordan. He's so talented, and he's so passionate about, his books and audiobooks. And, I love Hero, and their writing style together is just fantastic. So, it's just, I want all of their books to succeed, and all the authors I work with, I just want their books to just go out in the world and succeed. They're not my babies per se, but I do like send them off and be like, "Please, let's go. I can't wait for people to hear this.
I
It's
know
so good," or "This is such good writing paired with such talented narrators." It's just exciting. It's really exciting.
it is exciting. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to any future projects with audiobooks and things like that. So it's just been really amazing to have all these different forms that people can read in. So we
Yeah.
got the physical, we've got ebooks, we've got audiobooks, and I'll also link Erin's website, your website, in the description, and as well as your book and your services for One Night Stand Productions.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me.
Yes, it's been so fun. Thank you so much. And yeah, and
Okay.
to everyone watching this YouTube channel, we hope to see you next time in our story garden.